Screening for breast cancer for all women at 50. Mr. Reagan's Chief of Staff, is he on the way out? The government wants 3 new commercial radio networks. The survivor says you're Ivan from the gas chambers. The British women accused of smuggling heroin are freed on bail. Good evening. The government wants every woman between the ages of 50 and 64, those most at risk from breast cancer, to be screened every 3 years. It announced today the start of a major national campaign against the disease, which claims thousands of lives every year. Every regional health authority will have at least 1 new health screening centre. This is how the money will be allocated over the next 3 years. This year, there'll be £6 million. Next year, there'll be 13 million. And in 1988-89, another 22 million, making £41 million altogether. There'll be more money for AIDS too. The government is to give the Medical Research Council £14.5 million over 3 years to try and find both a cure and a vaccine.
For reasons the medical profession still doesn't understand, Britain has more cases of breast cancer in women than any other large industrialized nation. It's the commonest form of cancer among women in this country. Every year, there are about 24,000 new cases of breast cancer, about 20,000 operations involving part or complete removal of breasts, and 15,000 women die of the disease annually. That figure could be cut by a third with thorough screening. Within 2 years, the government hopes the National Screening Service will consist of 100 centres around the country. An ordinary doctor's examination only shows up cancer tumours at an advanced stage, while X-rays can detect cancer so early on that just a small piece of tissue has to be removed. Screening will be concentrated on 50 to 64-year-olds because the disease occurs most frequently in that age group and more lives can be saved.
I think it's a great contribution, but until we see how much the training costs for this, I think it will do a lot in setting up the units, but training doctors will take a lot longer than 1 year.
The fact of the matter is that we set up the Forest Committee in 1985, the middle of 1985. It reported to us in its final form at the end of last year. The government and I have accepted the proposals that the Forest Committee have made. They're very good proposals, and I believe that people all over the country and in all parties will welcome the decision.
In fact, the Labour spokesman, Michael Meacher, called the new measures a grossly inadequate response to the Forest report. For the Alliance, Simon Hughes broadly welcomed the proposals, but warned there must be proper coordination and sufficient publicity for the screening service. The government's new cash for AIDS research is based on the belief that a vaccine to fight the virus will be found one day. A committee of scientists is being set up to lead the hunt for that vaccine, with public and private laboratories able to bid for research contracts. It's hoped that Britain will play a major role in the international campaign to find a cure for AIDS.
This is not something which is just round the corner, so that everything that I have said over the past months about the importance of public education, about the importance of people acting on the messages that we have been sending out remains. It is not likely that we are going to have a breakthrough in the next year or two. There's no prospect, it seems to me, of that. So, although this is important, it doesn't mean that a breakthrough is just round the corner.
President Reagan is tonight facing one of the biggest tests of his political career. Soon, he and the world will hear the results of the Tower Commission set up by the president to investigate the Irangate affair. Leaks from the commission say that President Reagan was willing to exchange arms for American hostages, but that hasn't been confirmed. The report is due out in Washington at 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, our time. At 4 o'clock, the president himself will introduce a news conference by the commission. The former Republican Senator, Mr. John Tower, and his team examined thousands of computer memos inside the National Security Council. The leaks in America claim that the president had regular briefings on the arms deals from his former security advisor, Vice Admiral John Poindexter, and that the president has now told his chief of staff, Mr. Donald Regan, to leave his post.
I am grateful to all of you.
The commission everyone thought would conduct the least damaging of the various Iran scandal investigations will instead deliver what's described as a devastating blow to the Reagan administration. It will outline an attempted White House cover-up and present a picture of a maverick staff dabbling unsupervised in covert international operations.
And in considering our quest for
It's reported today the Tower Commission has concluded Ronald Reagan did want to swap arms for hostages, not open contact with Iranian moderates as claimed. Even more damning, the discovery that he was regularly briefed on what was happening, but that his involvement in discussions was often limited to asking about the hostages and telling anecdotes. It was here in the imposing old executive building next door to the White House that the covert operations were conceived by Colonel Oliver North and his staff. Their secrets revealed to the Commission from the memory banks of the National Security Council's computer system. Colonel North had tried to cover his tracks, his secretary Fawn Hall helping him to shred sensitive documents. The President himself first told the Commission he approved arms shipments in August 1985, as stated by former security advisor Robert McFarlane. But after a briefing from Chief of Staff Donald Regan, he changed his story, claiming approval came in January last year. The Commission pursued the matter with McFarlane himself, questioning him in hospital where he was recovering from a suicide attempt. McFarlane stuck by his story. Now the President has written to the Commission, telling them he simply can't remember, an explanation that Democrat leaders who called at the White House today found unconvincing.
That is the problem, because it's not remembering a particular event on a particular day, but rather forgetting that he violated his own policy against terrorism. You can't forget that.
Chief of Staff Regan is now said to have agreed with the President a way in which he can make what's called a graceful exit from the White House within the next 10 days. A higher price may be paid by Admiral John Poindexter, the SAC security advisor, and Colonel North. Their role in the cover-up could bring charges of obstructing justice. But the crucial question, what effect will tomorrow's report have on the President himself?
I don't think we're talking Watergate. We're not talking about the resignation or the impeachment of a president. What we're talking about is a system in which the government can't fall, but the government can linger. What is likely to happen is 2 years of paralysis.
Some administration officials believe it needn't come to that by accepting the blame and restructuring his White House staff, the President can make a clean start. But with congressional hearings still to come, with more disclosures and more embarrassment, many here feel Ronald Reagan cannot now recover. Tim Hewitt, News at 10, Washington.
Here, the government has published radical new proposals to expand commercial radio. In a green paper out today, it says it wants to increase competition with the BBC and introduce greater diversity for listeners. It plans to set up 3 new national stations paid for by advertising. It wants to relax editorial and technical regulations for the 45 existing local commercial stations and create hundreds of new community stations. The BBC welcomed today's proposals, which mean the government has finally rejected the Peacock Committee's recommendation to privatise radios 1 and 2.
The network chart, first with the nation's top 30.
It's 13 years since commercial radio first hit the airwaves, but David Jensen's Sunday Chart Show is still the only independent radio programme which reaches a national audience. For the rest of the time, Derek Jameson and co. on BBC Radio's 1, 2, 3 and 4 have the field to themselves. Now the government wants to break that national monopoly and open up radio to provide whatever the consumer wants.
But I think the time has come to loosen the reins and to let people come forward with ideas and with resources and let them put them into radio, and then it will be the listener, the customer, who decides.
That's a challenge welcomed by both the BBC and the independent broadcasters, who say they're confident there's enough advertising to finance the new stations.
We have believed that the introduction of independent national radio will introduce into the system a high demand for new revenue into radio. This will in turn flow back into the system as a whole, in enlarging the base of radio advertising. This has to be good.
The proposals will certainly go down well with minority audiences. In place of the pirates, they would get their own community stations. Though it may be some years before any changes come into effect, British radio will never be the same again. Kevin Dunn, News at 10, Central London.
MPs had their first chance tonight to see the banned BBC television programme about the Zircon spy satellite. Speaker of the Commons, Mr Bernard Wetherill, lifted his ban on MPs seeing the film after the High Court lifted its injunction preventing the journalist Mr Duncan Campbell from discussing the secret spy satellite.
A survivor of the Treblinka death camp spurned the hand of John Demjanjuk in an Israeli courtroom today and said he was Ivan the Terrible who helped to send thousands of Jews to the gas chambers. Demjanjuk, a former American car worker who was deported to face trial, denies he was ever in Treblinka, where 870,000 Jews were gassed.
Elihu Rosenberg, one of the few survivors of the Treblinka death camp, was giving evidence against John Demjanjuk, the man they call Ivan the Terrible. Obviously distressed, but in a calm voice, Rosenberg described how he personally encountered Ivan when he was lashed 30 times by him. And he described the sounds as Ivan sent other Jews to the gas chambers.
Then these screams after 20 minutes died down. And then I heard moaning, groans, and that too subsided until it became quiet.
Rosenberg was asked to identify the man opposite. Then Demjanjuk held out his hand.
Mr. Rosenberg?
Rosenberg shouted angrily.
Please sit down. The public is requested to keep to its seat.
How dare you give me your hand, you murderer, he shouted. There was uproar in the courtroom. Rosenberg's wife fainted. Other people wept openly. Eventually, proceedings had to be stopped as Mrs. Rosenberg was led out of the court, supported by friends, obviously still very distressed.
Here, the Labour MP Greville Janner has threatened to name in the Commons 6 Nazi war criminals who are allegedly living in Britain. He says he'll reveal their identities next week if the evidence is strong enough. The Home Office has traced the 6 whose names were sent to Mrs. Thatcher along with 11 others last year. Now the Home Secretary is under pressure to act upon the allegations against those he knows are living in this country.
Age 71, Antonis Gakis has lived in Edinburgh since 1946, beginning his life in Britain as a miner, later to become a coal board inspector. A former Lithuanian lieutenant, he admits he was a police guard around the concentration camps and witnessed in particular the massacre of 150 Jews, an incident in which he insists he played no part.
Absolutely nil.
Were you aware that in protecting the Germans, that in fact you were helping them shoot and murder innocent people?
Yes, I was aware, but what we could do about it? If we didn't do, they would shoot us, and that's it.
It was in Lithuania, Poland and Latvia that the 17 men are said to have been involved in the killings of thousands of Jews. In the town of Riga, a police chief was allegedly responsible for wiping out Latvia's largest Jewish population.
First of all, we want a full and absolute investigation. We want to know how these people came to be in the United Kingdom in the first place, why and how they obtained British citizenship. Then we want the government to go through the possibilities most carefully of the action that it should take. Extradition is a possibility, deportation, removal of naturalization, prosecution, the law and the practice, and if the law isn't strong enough, we want them to change it.
Events at Nuremberg of the trials of Göring and Himmler are now being reenacted in Israel with Demjanjuk and are about to begin in Lyon with Klaus Barbie. Whether or not post-war Britain turned a blind eye to those whose actions brought about the scenes of degradation and suffering in the concentration camps has yet to be clarified.
Representatives of the American Nazi hunting group, who originally sent Mrs. Thatcher the dossier claiming Nazi war criminals were living in Britain, arrived in Paris tonight. They're on their way to London, where they'll meet the Home Secretary to try and persuade him to act on their allegations. They say the British could learn from the Americans and deport them.
We simply do not believe that the British government cannot find a solution. The United States government's found a solution, simply to deport these people once the evidence against them has been proven in a court of law. The British government should borrow a lesson from the U.S. on this matter and initiate deportation proceedings on the basis that these people lied. When they entered this country, they did not tell of their past. They hid their past from the British authorities, and on that basis, the British government could say their whole citizenship is suspect. There were 225,000 Jews in Lithuania before the war. As a result of the work of these police battalions, between 2,000 and 3,000 remained alive. The highest percentage of the final solution was carried out in Lithuania.
A car bomb near the Burj al Barajneh Palestinian refugee camp in Beirut has killed one person and injured 21 others. An anonymous telephone caller said it was aimed at Syrian troops. The bomb went off shortly after a massive funeral march to protest at the killing of at least 18 Shiite militiamen yesterday.
More than 10,000 mourners marched through the streets of southern Beirut, chanting death to Syria. They carried the 18 so-called martyrs, draped in white sheets. Victims, they say, of a deliberate massacre by Syrian troops. The militants of the fundamentalist Hezbollah, or Party of God, were killed yesterday in the bloodiest confrontation since the Syrians' move into West Beirut on Sunday. 300 people have been killed since then. Today, the Syrians tightened their grip on West Beirut and put on a show of strength outside the now abandoned Hezbollah headquarters, scene of yesterday's violence. Syrian army leaders say they came under fire here in the Basta district and only responded in defense. But Hezbollah have released a video which they claim shows how their men were massacred. Tonight, it's reported the Syrians have taken control of all but 2 districts of West Beirut, with soldiers carrying out checks on all cars and pedestrians. Now there's speculation they'll shortly move into the Hezbollah strongholds of southern Beirut, where 26 foreign hostages, including Terry Waite, are believed to be held.
2 English women arrested in Cairo on suspicion of smuggling £3 million worth of heroin into Egypt in a hollow wooden elephant have been released on bail, a report in Part 2. Also, Monsignor Bruce Kent says he's giving up the ministry to concentrate on nuclear disarmament. And now the Beatles go compact too. That's in a couple of minutes.
Two British sisters facing the death penalty on drugs charges in Egypt have been freed tonight on bail. They've denied smuggling £3 million worth of heroin into the country inside a wooden elephant. Both say they were conned into carrying the drug. Marian Arnold and Maureen Palesci have been released on bail of £2,000 each, but they've been told they can't leave the country.
The 2 women put on a brave face for their appearance at Cairo's Central Criminal Court, but the 2 Egyptians the women claimed tricked them into carrying the drugs were clearly uncomfortable with the cameras. In contrast, the sisters appeared relaxed, but when guards locked them in a cage holding male prisoners, they broke down. The women quietly sobbed, while their co-accused remained silent, covering their faces to avoid identification. Can you tell me how you're facing up to the ordeal so far? What's it like for you?
The worst ordeal is the children at home. But everybody's been so smashing. The guards at the prison's very good. The drug people have been very good. They've all been very kind, which is the main thing. But standing up to it, very worrying.
The prison we were in last week was pretty grotty, but I mean, everybody, they really have been absolutely fantastic. You know, whatever we wanted, they've given us. That's all I can say at the moment.
How are you standing up to it? It must be difficult for you.
Yeah. Very. Excuse me.
The case against the sisters, according to British diplomatic sources here, appears to be thin. The 2 Egyptians, on the other hand, are alleged to be part of a plot involving international drug smuggling. Even if it's believed they are innocents abroad, their ordeal won't be over until after exhaustive inquiries, which could take another month. But the news of their imminent bail was enough to raise spirits and a wave as they were taken back to prison for at least another night. Brent Sadler, News at 10, Cairo.
The Soviet leader, Mr. Gorbachev, has defended his reforms and said there are more to come. He was speaking today to a meeting of 5,000 trade unionists at the Kremlin Grand Palace. Mr. Gorbachev said the Soviet Union had to make changes or stagnate. He told his audience there's no other choice. Mr. Gorbachev admitted there were critics of his reforms. He said some people are confused and perplexed and some are dissatisfied. These we must help to understand the essential nature of what we have begun.
Here, the CND campaigner, Monsignor Bruce Kent, is giving up his ministry because he says he can no longer cope with the tensions caused by his dual role as Roman Catholic priest and an opponent of nuclear weapons. Monsignor Kent said he would remain a member of the church.
Monsignor Kent's roles as a peace campaigner and a priest came into serious conflict 7 years ago when he became General Secretary of CND. When he announced his decision to leave